All right, guys, so last time we were here, the king of Jerusalem, Hezekiah, he had taken his troops back to Jerusalem after losing in the Philistine territory, right? And they knew that Sennacherib, the Assyrian king, was going to turn his attention and his massive army on to Judah and Jerusalem. And they were waiting it out. Well, Hezekiah was worried. He knew that this was a massive army and that he had made them mad. And sure enough, soon the King Sennacherib started going to the different towns in Judah, taking down one after another. The majority of the Judean villages lay defenseless. They couldn't defend themselves. The countryside contained only 47 walled cities and towns, and even the walled ones couldn't withstand the army of Sennacherib and Assyria. Sennacherib soon divided his army into smaller raiding parties and sent them throughout Judea to mop up every town and village. Show no mercy. That was his instruction. Capture everyone who will surrender, whether they're men, women, or children. Get every treasure you can in animal and send it all to Assyria. We must assure that Judah will never trouble my empire again. I will transplant its people to 12 different countries. The nation will disappear from the earth. Hezekiah's armies met the Assyrians in battle, but every time it was complete defeat. The king and a small band of survivors were back in Jerusalem. In less than a month, Assyria had regrouped and had captured 45 walled towns and every open village. Rounded up more than 200,000 people, transported everybody back. Only 2 cities were left, Lachish and Jerusalem is the capital, Sennacherib decided. I will leave that until last. We will besiege Lachish first. Well, Lachish was the walled city. It had very thick walls. This was where Hezekiah's father had always had his retreat. Hezekiah knew that city was good. He didn't know what Sennacherib was thinking, though, right? Hezekiah had his whole other problem. He was worried about Jerusalem and the soldiers there that were now refusing to leave the city to help any of the others. No matter what he wished or commanded, the soldiers refused to leave the city. Not only that, within the city was his own family. He had wives and concubines and children all there. And when an invading army came in, they would always do the worst to the king's family. Hezekiah knew he needed to protect his wives and his daughters and his children, and he didn't know how. And so when he thought about it, he thought, wait a minute, I know. Lachish is the best walled city in my kingdom. Nothing could take it down. I could send my family there. So he got them all ready to go, and he told them, he said, here's what, when Assyria turns their sights on Jerusalem, and we know that they will, as it is the capital, my hope is that if it's just me and one of my wives and my heir to the throne, my oldest son, if we are here in Jerusalem, they will take us captive and leave the rest of you alone. So I'm going to send you off to Lachish. And so in a tearful goodbye, he packed them up. He hand chose some soldiers who remained loyal and would obey him to go to the city with him. And off they went. Meanwhile, he tried to send out his own soldiers, but again, to fight and protect these smaller towns, to be ready to fight and protect, I should say, Jerusalem. But they refused. They said that Assyria had the superior weapons and they would just stay back, and they would defend Jerusalem, and Jerusalem's walls would save them. Hezekiah knew that was no good. He said, this city can't keep them out forever. If they come here, it'll be too late. It's ridiculous. He knew that only Yahweh would be able to deliver them at that point. He felt better that his family wasn't there, though, at the very, very least. Just 7-year-old Prince Manasseh and his mother had stayed. Little did Hezekiah know that that was the last time he would see his family. So once they reached Lachish and he got word of that, Hezekiah puzzled over Sennacherib's movements. Why doesn't he advance on Jerusalem? He demanded in frustration. I'm his target. I'm the key. But the king soon recognized his strategy. Sennacherib had decided to destroy any help before attacking the heart of Judah itself. Daily, Hezekiah prayed in the temple. He fasted. He went on his feet. He went into mourning, praying and praying for the protection. Egypt had come to help, but slowly they dissolved and disappeared back. And he thought about the prediction that Egypt was as a broken reed. This is what Isaiah had said. Judah's last earthly hope was finally gone. Yahweh could only save them. Soon the Judean countryside crawled with Assyrian soldiers. They were plundering, destroying, taking captive. Thousands and thousands were sent north and sent away with Assyria. Many would pass within sight of Jerusalem, where they could see their temple, and Hezekiah just wondered why. Why would Yahweh let this happen? He could hardly believe it was happening. He thought to himself, Sennacherib just carves up our city and our countryside at his leisure. And yet he hasn't come to Jerusalem yet. My population is all here, and I keep begging my soldiers, he would say to his advisors. I keep begging my soldiers to go and fight, and yet they refuse. Don't ask them to leave these walls. They say they're not their brother's keepers. They should be. His advisors said to him, the Assyrians will take Lachish first. Oh man, Hezekiah didn't realize that. And he said, I've sent my family into the lion's jaws. He knew there was nothing he could do now. The citizens of Lachish saw that happening and prepared for it. And they got ready for a siege. They had the strongest walls of any city. Well, in typical Assyrian style, the siege finally began. They marched on Lachish. And they surrounded the city, and they started the battering rams against the walls. However, the base of the walls was so thick, it would take months and months, and the soldiers couldn't live in the countryside for months and months, and they would lose out in the siege. So they developed some pretty advanced strategies under the guidance of Sennacherib. They made giant ramps to roll the battering rams up so the battering rams could fling against the top layers of the city, which was much weaker. It was very dangerous if you were one of the ones on the battering rams, because along the city walls is where the soldiers would be shooting arrows down at the people in the battering rams. So more had to be done. Day after day, the archers on the Assyrian side were sending arrows into the city over and over, because since the city was under siege, if they could take out enough of the soldiers, there was no way to replace them. They couldn't get any new soldiers in. But they also did something else new. They started to tunnel under the walls. They would use giant wood cedar beams to hold up the tunnels, and they'd get them under there to hold them up under these big giant walls. And once the cedar beams were under the walls, they would light them on fire. And since they were in holes under the walls and they were holding it up, once the beams lit on fire, the beams would collapse, and then the walls on top of the ground would collapse with it. And just like that, Lachish had fallen. All this took time. Sennacherib was patient. I will stay here until this whole city is reduced to rubble, he said. These people will be duly chastised. How long will it take? I don't know. I'll do it as long as I need to, though, said Sennacherib. Hezekiah waited for word. He knew that next would be an attack on his own city. And we'll have to wait till next time to hear more about that. Have your prayers with your teachers, and we'll see you next week. Bye, guys.